third fallacy that Aristotle presents in Sophistical Refutations is the fallacy of composition. The fallacy of composition inaccurately concludes that a characteristic applying to a part of an object applies to the whole. This is clear in demonstrative examples. For example, the statement that a brick is lightweight, therefore a building made of bricks is lightweight, is a simple example of a composition fallacy. More complex composition fallacies have been widely discussed by economists. One example of this is the paradox of thrift introduced by John Maynard Keynes. If all individuals within an economy save, there is reduced economic activity and a consequent reduction in income, leading to less money to save. This is an example of an instance where a factor that applies to an individual does not apply to a wider group of which they are a part. In this instance, an action that is individually beneficial becomes a negative when carried out by a whole group. The fourth fallacy that Aristotle presents is the fallacy of division. The fallacy of division arises from the opposite approach. This fallacy inaccurately concludes that what is true for the whole is true for the individual parts. An example of this would be arguing that because a class achieves an average grade is over 80%, all students in the class have achieved over 80%. Statisticians often discuss the division fallacy in relation to inaccurate interpretations of statistics. An example of the division fallacy comes up in Simpson's paradox. In Simpson's paradox, a group of data would show a given trend when combined but show completely different trends when separated into subsets of this group. In this case, drawing conclusions about trends in subsets of data from a combined body of data would lead to inaccurate results. This shows the relevance of Aristotle's Sophistical Refutations in the information age, providing a framework for identifying misleading information. The fifth fallacy outlined by Aristotle is accent. The section described by Aristotle as prosody has widely been interpreted to relate to ambiguity arising from different accents denoted by diacritic marks. Although this section does not have as clear an interpretation as other sections in the text, there is a clear application to the way that stress can be placed within a sentence to change the meaning. This would lead to some of the same issues that arose from a lexical ambiguity addressed in the section on equivocation or syntactic ambiguity addressed in the section on amphiboly. Now, the sixth fallacy is the forms of expression. The fallacy of forms of expression relates to ambiguous language or phrases. In many cases, figures of speech will have a metaphorical meaning which is completely different in the literal meaning. Using these in an argument predicated on the ideas of logical reasoning can confuse the audience and make it difficult to interpret statements. This approach could be used to draw a false equivalency by using a figure of speech with a metaphorical meaning and using the same language in its literal meaning to draw a comparison. The language is being used in a different context with a different meaning but ostensibly sounds similar. The seventh fallacy is the accident fallacy. The fallacy of accident is an instance of secundum quid, which involves an attempt to apply a rule of thumb to a situation where it does not apply. This fallacy ignores the reasons why a rule of thumb may not apply to a specific instance. This can be viewed as creating an inaccurate generalization. This fallacy is also described as a faulty generalization, with a similar fallacy in mathematics described as an inappropriate generalization. This involves proof being demonstrated by an example in order to invalidly conclude that a statement definitively has wider applicability.